Imagine a narrow choke point in the ocean where the fate of the world's economy hangs by a thread. That's the Strait of Malacca, a 550-mile lifeline squeezed between Indonesia's Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula, acting as the ultimate superhighway connecting the Indian and Pacific Oceans. It's the pulse fueling East Asia's industrial powerhouse. Picture this: the strait pinches to a razor-thin 1.5 nautical miles, just 2.8 kilometers, at the Phillips Channel near Singapore. Through this bottleneck rushes 40% of global trade, and a staggering 80% of China's vital crude oil imports. One wrong move here, and boom, economic chaos. For China, it's a thrilling paradox: the strait powers their skyrocketing rise, yet it's a deadly vulnerability. Coined the Malacca Dilemma by President Hu Jintao in 2003, it's simple but scary. China's future depends on a sea path they don't own, patrolled by their arch-rival, the US Navy, and lined by nations like Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore that play their own game. To understand why the Malacca Dilemma is such a big deal today, you first have to see the Malacca Strait as more than just a strip of water. It has been a major stage for power struggles for over 600 years. Whoever controls the strait has basically held the master key to the riches of Asia. Its history is a repeating cycle. Rising powers always try to grab full control of this narrow sea route to dominate world trade, but they keep running into the same unbreakable problems: harsh geography and strong pushback from local people. The strategic importance of the Malacca Strait was first made official by the Malacca Sultanate. Around the year 1400, a prince named Parmeswara founded the city after fleeing the collapsing Majapahit Empire in Java, currently the island of Indonesia. In just a few decades, a sleepy fishing village turned into a busy, international trading hub. Its success came from two things: its perfect location and smart leadership. Malacca sits right at the narrowest part of the strait, safe from monsoon storms. It was the natural crossroads where trading ships from India and the Arab world, coming from the west, met ships from China, coming from the east, pushed by the seasonal winds. The Sultanate ran the port very wisely. They created clear maritime laws that set rules for all business, ship captains, crews, and port fees. They also appointed special harbor masters called Sibanders to look after different groups of foreign traders: Gujarati's, Tamilese, Chinese, and Javanese, so everyone felt safe and trade stayed fair and smooth. This period also created the first strong link with China. The Ming dynasty's Yongle Emperor gave Malacca protection. Admiral Zheng He's giant fleets from 1405 to 1433 used Malacca as their main supply base and stopover point. This early friendship with China shielded the young Sultanate from attacks by Siam, today's Thailand, and set the stage for Beijing's modern story of peaceful cooperation in the region. By the late 1400s, Malacca had become the most important center for spreading Islam across Southeast Asia and the main hub of the global spice trade. It showed the world that controlling the strait isn't just about military power, it also needs real political legitimacy and clever diplomacy with neighbors. That same lesson still matters for the countries along the coast today. The European chapter of controlling the strait started with the thunder of cannons in 1511. That year, the Portuguese general Alfonso de Albuquerque captured Malacca. Their big plan was simple and bold: break the Muslim traders' hold on the valuable spice trade by seizing the three key ports, Ormuz, Goa, and Malacca. The Portuguese way was all about military power and strong forts. They built a huge fortress called a Formosa. You can still see its famous gate, the Porta de Santiago, standing today as a reminder of that time. But their rule quickly showed the big weakness of trying to control the strait with force alone. They charged high taxes, acted aggressively, and showed little respect for other religions. This upset the many Asian traders who had kept Malacca thriving. Instead of obeying the Portuguese, the traders simply moved their business elsewhere. Even though the strait looks narrow, it's easy to bypass. Many shifted to rival ports like Aceh, at the northern tip of Sumatra, and Johor, at the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula. In the end, the Portuguese held the fortress, but they never controlled the actual flow of ships and goods through the strait. For the next 130 years they were stuck in almost constant fighting, trapped in what became known as the Triangular War, against the Sultanate of Aceh and the Sultanate of Johor. This period makes one thing very clear: just owning the city of Malacca does not mean you control the strait, not if the local people and traders refuse to support you. The Dutch East India Company, known as the VOC, finally captured Malacca in 1641 after a long and brutal siege, with help from the Sultanate of Johor. Their style was totally different from the Portuguese. It was more like running a giant business, cold, smart, and focused only on profit. They treated Malacca as just one small gear in their big company machine, which was controlled from Batavia, today's Jakarta. The Dutch turned the strait into a weapon for economic war. While fighting the Portuguese and later other European rivals, they noticed that the Singapore and Malacca Straits were perfect natural choke points. Their warships could easily block enemy supplies there. They kept patrol ships near the northern coast of Karimun and at the Hook of Berbuket, close to today's Changi, to watch every ship coming from the South China Sea and stop them if needed. Their plan was simple: force all ships to buy special passes or stop at Dutch ports and pay heavy taxes. This way they hoped to control the entire trade. But the geography still worked against them, just like it did for the Portuguese. Ships kept finding ways to slip through. At the same time, the British East India Company was quietly moving in. In 1786 they built a base in Penang. Eventually the Dutch realized it was more profitable to focus on the Sunda Strait and Java instead of holding Malacca. That shift opened the door for British power to grow in the region. The modern shape of power in the Malacca Strait was created by the British. They desperately needed a safe sea route to China for their booming tea trade. The Dutch were blocking the old paths, so the British looked for their own way. In 1819, Sir Stamford Raffles founded Singapore. This single move changed the whole game. Singapore had a much better, deeper harbor right at the southern mouth of the strait. Suddenly, the old Dutch port at Malacca became almost useless. The long rivalry between Britain and the Netherlands finally ended with the Anglo-Dutch Treaty of 1824, also called the Treaty of London. This agreement drew the line that still forms the modern border between Malaysia and Indonesia today. It also divided the region into clear British and Dutch zones, the same basic map of influence we still live with in Southeast Asia. Under British rule, the three ports of Penang, Malacca, and Singapore, known together as the Strait Settlements, became the protectors of free trade. The British Royal Navy kept the peace across the region, a time called Pax Britannica. They hunted down pirates and made sure merchant ships could sail safely through the strait without fear. For China, the lesson from this period is very clear and sharp. For the past 200 years, the Malacca Strait has been controlled by Western sea powers. These countries used the strait to manage Asian trade, and sometimes to block or stop it whenever it suited them. In 1942, the myth of Western unbeatable power was shattered when Imperial Japan captured Singapore. For the next 3.5 years, Japan controlled the Malacca Strait. They used it as a vital highway to ship oil from the Dutch East Indies, today's Indonesia, straight to their war factories. Then the Americans struck back with submarines. Their attacks turned the strait into a deadly trap for Japanese ships. By 1945, the waterway had become a graveyard of sunken Japanese oil tankers. The brutal lesson was simple: whoever controls the seas leading into the strait can choke the strait itself. That same lesson is still carefully studied today by China's modern navy, the People's Liberation Army Navy. The Malacca Dilemma is not merely a logistical bottleneck, it is a psychological siege mentality born of China's rapid ascent and its asymmetrical vulnerability to U.S. naval power. It represents the collision of China's continental geography with its globalized maritime needs. The term Malacca Dilemma, Malaysia Kuanjing in Chinese, was first coined in November 2003 by Chinese President Hu Jintao. During a private government economic meeting, Hu Jintao warned that certain powers, clearly referring to the United States, controlled the Malacca Strait and could use that control to threaten China's energy security. At the time, China's oil imports were growing extremely fast, already passing 100 million tons a year. China was becoming the factory of the world, but its energy supply line was dangerously weak. The dilemma has two simple but serious parts. 1. Dependence. China's economy cannot run without huge amounts of imported oil and raw materials, and almost all of it must travel through the Malacca Strait. 2. The strait is controlled by Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, countries that are close friends or partners of the United States. The U.S. Navy can easily block ships there, while China's own navy at that time had no real power to stop it in distant waters. Despite 2 decades of concerted efforts to diversify energy routes, Beijing's reliance on the Malacca Strait remains critically high in 2025. The data reveals a persistent strategic exposure. The Malacca factor is compounded by the Hormuz factor. While Malacca is the choke point en route, the Strait of Hormuz is the source of much of this oil. Disruption at either point is catastrophic, but Malacca is unique because it is the funnel through which all shipments from the Middle East and Africa to East Asia must converge. The ultimate strategic nightmare for Beijing is a distant blockade imposed by the United States during a high-intensity conflict, likely over Taiwan. Military experts have long argued about whether the United States could actually blockade the Malacca, Sunda, and Lombok Straits. A study by the U.S. Naval War College says blocking just the Malacca Strait would need roughly 10 warships and 2 supply ships. If the U.S. wanted to close all 3 straits, to stop ships from simply going around, it would need at least 16 warships and 4 supply ships. American forces could operate from bases in Singapore, Changi Naval Base, Diego Garcia, or Australia. India's Andaman and Nicobar Islands sit like a metal chain across the western entrance. India has upgraded airfields, such as INS Baz, and naval bases there, giving it the ability to watch and stop Chinese ships or submarines before they even reach the main strait. Some analysts say the idea is overblown, basically a bluff. They argue that closing the strait would cause huge economic damage to America's own allies. Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan all depend on it for their energy. Also, modern shipping is complicated. Much of China's oil travels on foreign-flagged ships, flags of convenience, so it is legally and practically hard to stop only Chinese cargo without hurting everyone else. Despite the doubts in the West, Chinese military writings treat the blockade threat as a matter of survival. This fear is the main reason China's navy is shifting from near-seas defense, protecting waters close to home, to far-seas protection, operating far from home. Beijing assumes that in a real war, the United States would be willing to accept the economic pain to cut off China's lifeline. While big worries about countries blocking the strait are the main strategic concern, everyday threats from non-government groups like pirates are still a real and ongoing problem for ships. The strait has always been a prime spot for piracy because of its setup, tight waterways, ships moving slowly, and tons of hiding places in the mangrove forests around Sumatra and the Riau Islands. In 2025, the Regional Cooperation Agreement on Combating Piracy and Armed Robbery Against Ships in Asia, RECOP, a group fighting sea crimes, saw a big jump in piracy and robberies in the Straits of Malacca and Singapore, often called SOMS. Attacks quadrupled in the first 6 months of 2025 compared to the same time in 2024, 80 cases versus 21. Most were small-time thefts, where crooks sneak onto slow bulk carriers or tankers to grab things like engine parts, scrap metal, or crew's personal stuff. These aren't as brutal as kidnappings in places like the Sulu Sea or Gulf of Guinea, but with so many happening, they mess up shipping timetables and jack up insurance costs. China is a full member of RECOP and sits on its governing board. But it doesn't do much hands-on patrolling in the strait. That's handled by the nearby countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, and Thailand, through their joint Malacca Straits patrol system. China helps by sharing info and training others, but it doesn't run its own patrols in those local waters. Beijing has pursued a frenetic, multi-pronged strategy to escape the Malacca trap. This involves building a blue water navy to protect the corridor and, more importantly, constructing massive infrastructure projects to bypass it entirely via the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. China has invested tens of billions of dollars in overland energy corridors designed to transport oil and gas directly into western China, avoiding the maritime choke point. However, each route faces severe geographical and geopolitical limitations. Quebec is the showpiece project of China's Belt and Road Initiative. It links the deep-water port of Gwadar on the Arabian Sea to Kashgar in China's Xinjiang region, using the famous Karakoram Highway as the main route. Ships bring oil from the Persian Gulf and unload it at Gwadar. From there, the oil is supposed to be piped, or trucked, straight overland to China. This shortcut would cut thousands of kilometers off the usual sea journey and let China completely skip the Strait of Malacca. The port at Gwadar is fully working. But the dream of a complete energy corridor, a big pipeline all the way to China, is still just that, a dream. Attacks by Baloch separatist groups on Chinese workers and projects have caused serious delays. On top of that, the Karakoram Mountains are incredibly tough terrain, making huge pipelines both technically very hard and extremely expensive to build. Even if the pipeline were finished tomorrow, it would only move a small fraction of the oil China needs every day. So while Quebec is very important for strategy and politics, it can't replace the main sea route through the Strait of Malacca. The China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, CMEC, features twin oil and gas pipelines that run from the port of Kayakpiu on the Bay of Bengal all the way to Kunming in China's Yunnan province. The oil pipeline started running in 2017, and the gas one in 2013. The oil line is built to handle up to 22 million tons a year, which works out to about 440,000 barrels per day. The pipelines cut through parts of Myanmar hit hard by civil war since the 2021 military takeover. Keeping them safe is tricky because the ruling junta only controls some areas, and rebel groups could easily sabotage them. It's a working way to skip the Strait of Malacca, but it only covers a tiny slice of China's huge oil needs, over 11 million barrels a day. It helps spread out the risks, but doesn't solve the main problem. A big change in 2024 to 2025 has been China leaning more on energy from Russia delivered over land, which the US Navy can't touch. In 2025, Russia became China's top overall energy supplier, delivering 19% of all its energy imports. The Power of Siberia gas pipeline is running at full blast, and oil comes in big amounts through the Eastern Siberia, Pacific Ocean, ESPO, pipeline and by train. This land route is the only one that fully dodges the Malacca Dilemma. If sea routes get blocked, Russia's supplies could act as China's emergency stockpile, giving them time to figure things out. The most ambitious plan to skip the Strait of Malacca is the Thailand Land Bridge, a fresh take on an old idea from centuries ago to cut a path across the Kra Isthmus. Digging a full canal would be way too expensive, bad for the environment, and politically tricky because it would basically split southern Thailand in two. So instead, the plan calls for building two big deep-sea ports, Ranong on the Andaman Sea side and Chumphon on the Gulf of Thailand side, linked by a 90 km highway and railway. Ships would unload cargo at one port, truck or train it across the land bridge, and reload it onto ships at the other port, completely avoiding the Malacca Strait. Thailand's government, under Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra, who came in after the 2023 elections, is pushing hard to get investors on board. In 2025, Thai officials held promotional events in Beijing, drawing interest from big Chinese companies like China Harbour Engineering Company. The whole thing is budgeted at around 1 trillion Thai baht, about $29 billion. It could shave about 4 days off shipping times and dodge the traffic jams in the Malacca. The extra steps of unloading and reloading cargo add big costs. Experts in shipping say the time saved might get eaten up by all that handling. Plus, Singapore's super-efficient port and its whole setup make it a tough rival. For China, Putting money into this is a smart move to gain control over a new route and break away from Singapore and US influence on the strait. But in Thailand, there's pushback from locals, worries about the environment, and doubts about whether it'll actually make money. China isn't happy anymore just relying on the US to keep sea routes safe for free. The Malacca Dilemma has sparked a major overhaul in how China's Navy thinks and operates. China's Navy, known as the People's Liberation Army Navy, has evolved from mainly guarding its own coasts to being ready for far seas protection, meaning operations way out in the open ocean. Launching the Fujian, Type 003, and working on the nuclear-powered Type 004 shows China's push to build full carrier battle groups. These could challenge control of the seas in areas like the Second Island Chain, a line of islands farther from China, and the Indian Ocean. Since 2008, the People's Liberation Army Navy has made it routine to send ships to the Indian Ocean for anti-piracy patrols in the Gulf of Aden. This not only protects trade ships but also gives China's Navy real-world practice in handling long-distance supply chains and keeping operations going far from home. To back up these far-flung missions, China is building a chain of support spots for supplies and logistics. Djibouti set up in 2017, this is China's first military base abroad. It's right at the gateway to the Red Sea, securing the western side of their Indian Ocean supply routes. There are reports China now has sole use of the northern part of Ream Naval Base, Cambodia, sitting on the Gulf of Thailand. It gives the People's Liberation Army Navy a key spot nearer to the Malacca Strait, letting them stretch their influence deeper into Southeast Asia. Gwadar Port of Pakistan, officially just a trade port, but it could double as a Navy supply point. Right now, though, its military value is held back by poor inland connections and ongoing security risks. The security setup in the Malacca Strait is all about the push-pull between the nearby countries wanting to keep control and the big powers pushing for open access. This tension ramped up in 2024 and 2025. The littoral states including Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore are firm that they're the ones mainly in charge of keeping the strait safe. They started the Malacca Straits Patrol in 2004, with Thailand jumping in by 2008, to team up on air and sea patrols. This small group setup was meant to keep outsiders like the US or Japan from stepping in directly, even if it was for fighting terrorism or piracy. Singapore walks a tightrope, mixing strong security links with the US and big economic deals with China. Singapore lets the US Navy base its logistics group Western Pacific, Comlog Westpac, there and hosts rotating visits from US littoral combat ships, LCS, and P-8 Poseidon spy planes. These help the US keep a close eye on the strait. At the same time, Singapore does joint training exercises with China's Navy. In 2023, they set up a secure defense hotline, and in 2025, they ramped up teamwork on eco-friendly shipping routes. Singapore's game plan is to keep the US around as a security backup while staying on good terms with China, its top trade buddy. Malaysia plays it smart with a hedging approach, balancing sides without fully committing. In 2025, Malaysia and China held a 2+2 talks on sea matters, promising to build more trust. But Malaysia still deals with pushy actions from China's Coast Guard around its oil and gas spots in the South China Sea, like Laconia Shoals. Malaysia sticks with the Five Power Defence Arrangements, FPDA, teaming up with the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore. It does joint drills with the US but is careful not to pick sides openly against China. As the biggest country bordering the strait, Indonesia is the big player in the region's politics. Under President Prabowo Subianto, elected in 2024, Indonesia has been handling a tricky balancing act. In November 2024, a joint announcement between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Prabowo kicked off a major diplomatic uproar. It talked about agreeing on joint development in areas where claims overlap. Indonesia has always said it has no overlapping claims with China, insisting that China's 9-line isn't valid under international sea laws and doesn't touch Indonesia's exclusive economic zone in the North Natuna Sea. Critics said the statement quietly gave a nod to China's invalid claims, weakening Indonesia's control over its territory and splitting up ASEAN's united front. Indonesia's foreign ministry later explained that no sovereignty was given away and it was just about economic teamwork, like in fishing, but the whole thing showed how China likes to deal one-on-one to chip away at group opposition. Even with this friendly diplomatic move, Indonesia is beefing up its coast guard, Bakamla, and doing joint patrols with Vietnam plus military exercises with the US, like Super Garuda Shield, to show it's serious about defending its interests. India sees the Malacca Strait as its own strategic neighborhood and a key way to counter China's influence. Andaman and Nicobar Command, ANC, is India's first joint command involving Army, Navy, and Air Force, located right at the western entrance of the strait. Chinese experts have called it a metal chain that could potentially block the strait. India has boosted its navy setup in the islands and runs joint patrols with Indonesia and Thailand. It presents itself as a net security provider, giving nearby countries a reliable option if they're worried about China taking over. The Strait of Malacca isn't just a busy shipping route, it's like a living history book of power in Asia. From the old Sultanate small boats to Portuguese sailing ships, Dutch trading vessels, British steamers, and now China's huge oil tankers, the strait has always been the big prize everyone wants. China's Malacca Dilemma is the natural worry of a land-based giant trying to become a sea power too. Looking at the strait's past, like how the Portuguese fort failed or the Dutch control didn't last, shows that real safety here doesn't come from military muscle or building detours, but from getting buy-in from the nearby countries and keeping the world stable overall. Even after pouring billions into pipelines, ports, and aircraft carriers, geography doesn't budge. The Thailand land bridge is hitting money troubles, the Kpek route is bogged down by tough mountains and rebel attacks, and the Myanmar path is at risk from ongoing civil war. For now, the Malacca Dilemma can't be fixed. The strait acts like a geographical prison, holding back China's growth, keeping its vital trade lines in waters it can't fully control. As long as the US Navy watches over global seas and the local countries fiercely protect their rights, the Malacca Strait will stay the world's riskiest bottleneck, a skinny waterway where a superpower's big dreams crash into cold, hard facts.